What's up, ladies and gents? It's your boy Alombre, Trust the Profits, joined today by Matthew DeSantis at Field the Menace, and we're going to cover today for you the top 25 Kentucky Derby prep horses here. And we're getting into the thick of it. The Withers was postponed last weekend, as everybody knows. We did have a couple go off, and I don't know, Matthew, run down. Who do we think we saw in there that could be a significant player? And there was another horse that I know we both noted that was not in either of those races that was also on everybody's radar pretty high.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we saw was a couple of horses pop up. It was not all that dissimilar actually to the Lecomte day in that there were some races on the undercard at Lecomte that showed some potential Derby contenders. I think we saw the same thing, particularly in the undercard of the Holy Bull, with a horse that we're going to get to here, Tapit Trice, running very impressively underneath on that day. And then, yeah, I mean, there was obviously some form flattering. There's some transitive properties going on. If A equals B, B equals C, sort of stuff where, well, this horse beat that horse who lost to this other horse. And so, there's a little bit of stock up, stock down with certain horses because of how things shook out this weekend, and got another big weekend coming up, obviously, with prep races at Tampa Bay and the Withers, and then out at Golden Gate with the El Camino Real as well.
Yep, exactly. We had basically at this point of the season, that's all you can do is kind of backtrack and look at who faced who and how they fared against each other, because that's the best guess we have in a lot of the cases.
Yep.
Let's go ahead and kick this thing off. And you will notice the red highlight on the next race here means that they're running this weekend. And I believe this is the only horse that's on our top 25 that is scheduled to run this weekend in any of the prep races this week, in the points races. Could be wrong, but that's what that red, the light red under the Sam F. Davis Stakes. That is one of the races coming this weekend at Tampa Bay. So let's kick it off at 25. This is a consensus of our team at Trust the Profits. And we had a tie for 25th, Dub and Reincarnate, ironically, both by Good Magic. And what are our thoughts on either of these two or both of them, however you want to handle it? Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Reincarnate, obviously, last time, we saw him was winning that sham stakes. And I think that perhaps the performance at the Robert B. Lewis this weekend may actually elevate what you may think of Reincarnate. Newgate, who could not beat Reincarnate that day, comes back to win the Robert B. Lewis in a rather unimpressive performance. I know what the Beyer speed figure says, but that was not exactly an inspiring performance from Newgate. And even Bob Baffert seemed rather subdued after the race was over. So Reincarnate's a horse that, like I said, he was an unthought of and kind of afterthought within the Baffert barn, but may actually end up being a legitimate contender here, given how everything else is shaken out.
Okay, what about WNL? That's a horse that I
yeah,
believe it's the first time this horse has showed up on our top 25, and not the first time the horse has been on any of our top 25s, but our consensus. So
yeah, WNL's an interesting horse. Won the Remsen last time out, and it's important to remember that race last year produced 2/3 of our Triple Crown winners with early voting and Mo Donegal. So that was a very live race last year. I don't think this version of it, this edition, is maybe quite as live, but we'll see. Obviously, this weekend at the Tampa, at the Sam Davis down at Tampa Bay, I'll be running there. But also, what's interesting is the horse that ran second that day to WNL at the Remsen, Arctic Arrogance, is going to be running at the Withers. So this is going to be a real good day to kind of determine how strong was that Remsen with turning between how WNL and Arctic Arrogance performed. But certainly expecting a good effort there, as won 2 out of 3 races, and only loss was a debut maiden in which Instant Coffee won that race.
Yeah, that's kind of an unknown. I think we're going to learn a lot about that horse this weekend for sure. At 24, we have Tapit's Conquest by Tapit, the Brad Cox barn, targeting the Risen Star, which is looking like a really strong race. If half of these horses that are entered actually go to that race, it's going to be wild. So what do you have on Tapit's Conquest?
Yeah, he's kind of one of the horses that I alluded to earlier. Ran really well in the Lecomte undercard in an allowance race, just lost it determinedly. Here's the thing, though. That was the first race back off the bench for a little while for Tapit's Conquest. I'd expect second time off the bench to be even better. And that was also a race where determinedly kind of got his own way up front. Didn't face any pace pressure. And, Tapit's Conquest came running at the end, and it seems like the more distance you give this horse, the better. So I think very high on this horse moving forward.
Yeah, that's always good to see when they're speeding away from the finish line and on the shorter races. Makes you think that, and that's what we saw with Tapit Trice as well.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that's a good sign, and it's just a matter of not knowing or not having seen enough, really. So 23 National Treasure, the third place finisher in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile.
Yep.
Another Bob Baffert horse out of Quality Road. What do we have on National Treasure at this point?
Yeah, just worked on Monday and it delivered a 49-4 for furlong work, which, if you know anything about Bob Baffert horses, is actually relatively slow. But that kind of defines National Treasure in that he's not a horse that has dazzling turn of foot or dazzling speed. He reminds me actually of a lot of other Bob Baffert horses, horse a little bit like Faustin, but maybe a lesser version of him. He's just a grinder. He just kind of wears you down and just kind of, I keep saying this every time we talk about him, but he's just going to want more and more distance. And so when we start getting out of these 1 1/16 races and get to 1 1/8, a 1 3/16, a 1 1/4, that's where I think he's going to be at his best, because his pedigree underneath screams distance.
All right. And up to 22, Signator by Tappet, Shug McGahee, and Having a Meltdown, Uncaptured. We'll just cover both of these at the same time, because I think they're both in the same boat. We're not sure that they're actually going to be on our list next week, speaking of where they're targeting and how things are going with both of them. So
yeah,
touch on both of them a little bit.
Yeah, so Signator had been on the work tab down in Palm Meadows for Shug McGahee, but didn't register a work over the last 10 to 12 days, which is a little concerning when a young horse misses a work like that. Maybe they bring him back, but potentially there's a little bit of a setback in training. So hard to kind of tell for a horse that's only ever broken its maiden. And then Having a Meltdown, I personally, he's not on my top 25 list. I know he's not on yours either. Some other people within Trust the Profits are kind of holding on to him a little bit, but I just think he's a one-turn sprint horse, and a very, very good one at that, but I just don't think he's on the Derby trail.
All right. I'm not sure 100% if that's been determined yet, but I agree. It's just a matter of whether they want to try to make something happen that probably shouldn't, but we'll see where that goes. I doubt it'll happen. At 20, let's move to the next 5 here. At 20, we have Practical Move by Practical Joke out of the Actine Barn. No race determined that he's entered so far that we're aware of. What do you have on Practical Move?
Yeah, and that's going to be interesting about whether or not he kind of targets the San Felipe or some of these other Kentucky Derby prep races in California, because obviously there's points to be had out there. Because as of the recording of this, and there might very well be a judicial injunction in a couple of weeks regarding Bob Baffert, but right now Baffert horses can't earn any points, and so this is one of the few horses out in California, quite frankly, that can earn Kentucky Derby points. Winner of the Los Alamitos Futurity. Interested to see what he's going to do next time. But he has been on the work tab. He has been, producing steady weekly work. So I would expect Timmy Actine to have him entered in a big spot here in the next couple of weeks.
It's interesting that he wasn't entered in some of these small field California races that had points available. For the reason you just said. So another Baffert horse, 19 Hijazi by Bernardini, going to the San Felipe next year. What do we have on Hijazi? I know he was impressive last time out.
Yeah, Hijazi, the question is the distance and the 2 turns. He finished 3rd in the American Pharaoh, but of course that was to Cave Rock and National Treasure. No disrespect there to finish, 3rd to those 2 horses out in front. The question is just going to be whether he can get the distance. I will say Bob Baffert seems very high on this horse. The interviews post-race after Hijazi broke his maiden finally were, Baffert said, quote, "We're going to have fun with this one." So they have big things in store for this horse, and I think very, very high expectations. Those Bernardini babies are quite good this year. There's a few good ones, and I think he's certainly one of them. So excited to see what he does around 2 turns next time out.
Extra Anejo at 18. Into Mischief, Steve Asmussen Barn. Here's another one where we've got a couple of us that still holding on to the top 25 for this horse, and a couple that aren't. So where we at on Extra Anejo?
Yeah, Extra Anejo is a horse I absolutely love. I'm excited. I hope to see him sometime soon, but he's just not on the work tab at all. And so at this point, hard to really put a lot of, emphasis behind a horse who's not on the work tab and hasn't been on the work tab for a few months leading into Derby prep season.
And here's your Bobby Lewis winner, Newgate at 17 by Baffert. Into Mischief. Again, I'll just echo what you said a minute ago. The horse was good enough to win. It was a 4-horse field, and we had a little bit of a debate on whether he ran pretty good considering who he was running against, or was the field just weak and that he's really not running well. I mean, it's hard to tell with that California situation, but nonetheless, Newgate's a winner and has won in the past. So he's at 17 right now. We're going to see what happens next for him. What do you have on Newgate?
Yeah, much the same. Just to echo that. I mean, he's a horse that again is a little bit like National Treasure, not super flashy, a little bit of a grinder. Frankie Dettori kind of did a good job rating him, I thought. And he obviously came off the turn and then fought for home. You always like to see a horse that likes to fight to win, but you would have liked to see him pull away a little bit more from that field. But hey, a win's a win, and I think he's just a step down from some of the top Baffert horses that he has.
Exactly. Solid horse, probably will be in the gate. Probably not a threat to win, in my opinion.
Yeah.
16, First Defender, Steve Asmussen Barn by Quality Road. What do we know on him?
Yeah, so this is a horse that only ran one race, broke his maiden on that Lecomte undercard for Steve Asmussen, but looked really, really good doing it. And this horse had just put in a 5 furlong bullet, 59-4 work at Fairgrounds today on Monday, February 6th, the day we're recording this. I think the big question is whether or not Asmussen bumps him immediately from maiden special weight straight to a stakes race, or if he tries to find some high-level allowance race to run him in. Thing is, you're starting to run out of time to have him too many races. I mean, you basically have 2 more races before the Derby. So got to see what he wants to do, but super talented, super talented colt.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. You're right, because we're running out of time. Each region has a couple left. That's about it. So. Number 15, the winner of the Holy Bull Rocket Can by Into Mischief out of the William Mott Barn, targeting the Fountain of Youth, we're hearing. What do you have on Rocket Can? What did you think of that performance?
I thought it was fine. I thought, the buyer speed figure came back as an 82, which was exactly the same buyer speed figure he recorded in his last race, which was a second place to confidence game. A couple months ago down at Churchill Downs. I will say, obviously, this was his first race off the bench in 10 plus weeks. So, I'm willing to give the horse a break and the benefit of the doubt and go maybe second back off the bench. We see a progression. That definitely happens with horses. Wasn't the strongest field. Did have a very wide trip, I will say, probably traveled the furthest distance out of any of the horses in the race. So that was something good to see in terms of he should be able to handle more distance. I think you have to respect him for winning the Holy Bull and right now being among the better horses that are down in that Florida circuit. But, that Fountain of Youth is going to really be the telling tale.
Absolutely. These next 4 are all loosely slated for the Risen Star. We'll see what happens. I'm sure not all these target next races are actually going to come to fruition, but we'll see. 14, we have Red Route 1 by Gunrunner, also out of the Asmussen Barn. Any new notes on Red Route 1? I know he's coming off a pretty nice run.
He is. And I think the biggest thing for Red Route 1, wherever he's entered next, whether it's the Risen Star or whatever, is just to really pay attention to the pace. I mean, this is a horse that needs pace set up. He's going to come running late. He's got great late speed. The more distance, the more speed, the better it is for Red Route 1. So just something to keep in mind when looking at him on past performances when you see him next time out. Hopefully there's a little bit of speed up front in that field wherever he ends up going, because if he doesn't have much speed, then it might be a little bit of an issue for him to close. But certainly looked really, really good at that Southwest Stakes, finishing second to Arabian Night, I should say.
Yeah, careful there. That's a big
yeah. One is on our list very high, and the other is not on our list at all.
Number 13, Two Phils. We also saw him run weekend, 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Hard Spun, also coming off a nice run out of the Larry Ravelli barn.
Yeah.
Also targeting the Risen Star, I believe. So again, we'll update these every week. But what do we see on Two Phils? What are we doing here?
Well, Two Phils is one of those horses that we teased at the beginning, kind of had his form flattered a little bit this past weekend because he beat Confidence. He finished second to Instant Coffee, but easily bested Confidence Game in that Lecomte. And again, Confidence Game beat Rocket Can last time out. So again, it's one of those things where it's not saying that these horses are all great necessarily, but you start weeding through the contenders and you start going, well, wait a second, this horse beat that horse, and so therefore this horse's opinion kind of, you have to be higher. You have to be careful with that. Horse racing is a very, these horses are still maturing, still getting better. But like I said, Two Phils was a horse who had his form flattered a little bit this weekend.
Yeah, I mentioned that in a group text we had going on earlier today, that this is kind of the opposite crop of last year, where last year it felt like it was really deep without a whole lot of top heavy horses. We kind of nobody could decide on the couple favorites. I mean, Epicenter was up toward the top for everybody, but outside of him, it was a pretty deep, 5 to 10 horses that everybody was calling the best going into the Kentucky Derby. And this year, it's quite the opposite, where it looks like there's 3 or 4 up there, and it's not very deep. That we can tell.
It's a lot of question marks, and nobody's really blowing you off the screen. And really, the biggest speed figures have all been coming from the Baffert horses, and there's big question marks around those horses about whether they're even going to make it into the starting gate, or which ones are going to get transferred, and how they're going to run. They can't all win the prep races, so somebody's got to finish second or third, and so we'll see kind of what ends up happening there.
Number 12, Determinedly, Cairo Prince, Mark Cassie barn. What do we know on him?
Yeah, so he's the horse that that actually beat. Now I'm blanking on the horse's name we talked about a little bit earlier, but beat a horse last time out, Tappett's Conquest. Beat Tappett's Conquest last time out, and in that Lecomte undercard. And the thing about Determinedly is he had to do it from the lead. That was not his style. He's more of a stalker, and the horse that was supposed to go to the lead didn't really fire and decided to rate that day. So I actually kind of like that this is a horse that figured out he could wire the field. I always like, when going to the Derby, I always like to see horses that have multiple ways to win and have proven that they can win in multiple ways. And I think I'm not saying that Determinedly is going to try to wire more fields, but the fact he has that in his back pocket, knows he can do that, has to give whoever's riding him a little bit more juice.
All right. At number 11, we have Curly Jack, who's coming off the second place to Instant Coffee last time out. Good Magic, Tom Amos barn. Why so high? Why are we so high on Curly Jack?
I think he is the beneficiary of not having run a lot lately. Like, I feel like everybody else you can start poking holes in.
It really is what you said a minute ago. I mean, like, we keep on moving everybody else down.
I don't think Curly Jack's
these horses that haven't run yet are maybe looking a little better than what they really are too. But we'll see. I mean,
exactly. I mean, I have a hard time thinking Curly Jack's the 11th best horse in this crop, but he might be. I mean, it's one of those things where he does always turn in an honest effort, but he hasn't really demonstrated the ability to beat the upper echelon of horses. So we'll see. I mean, next time out, it's going to be a big moment for him, obviously. But he feels like a horse who's going to be in the starting gate, because I feel like he's just going to rack up points underneath, finishing second, third in some of the big prep races.
All right, let's move into the top 10. These are the big boys we've got on the board so far, the most confidence in, which, again, we're not sure. We haven't seen some of these horses run in quite a time. And in other cases, there's big question marks still. So at number 10, we have seen run recently is Faustin, also out of the Baffert barn by Curlin, targeting the San Felipe next. What do we know on Faustin? Anything new this week?
Nothing really new other than, obviously, if you look at the Robert B. Lewis, you can say, well, I don't think any of those horses are really going to challenge him potentially. I mean, so again, his stature elevates within the Baffert barn, perhaps a little bit. I also think this is a horse, you and I have talked about this multiple times. I don't think we've seen the best version of this horse yet. This horse wants 2 turns, and he's only been sprinting to this point. So I think, with him doing 2 turns next time out, that's going to be big. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do there.
Yeah, right now I think he's one of the top couple in California for sure.
Yeah.
Even though he did lose to having a meltdown, correct?
Right. But I mean, that's kind of, he lost to having a meltdown on having a meltdown's home turf, so to speak, a 7 furlong sprint. A little bit like, it reminds me a little bit of when Life is Good lost to Jackie's Warrior in a sprint when he came back from the layoff. It's like, well, that's kind of Jackie's Warrior's MO. And that's not really Life is Good's MO in terms of like Life is Good was a mile, or 9 furlongs. So, So I think, like I said, we have yet to see the best from him.
Number 9, Blazing Sevens, another one who's moved up a little bit on our charts this week because he hasn't run.
Well, he hasn't run, but he's also started to work out. And that's a big shift, because some of these horses that we've had at the bottom that you and I have already mentioned, maybe haven't been working, they're going to start dropping off. But Blazing Sevens at least is back on the work tab, which makes me think he is targeting something down in that Florida prep or New York prep, depending on where Chad Brown wants to send him. But has been working out the last few weeks pretty regularly. That's good to see. This is a horse that, of course, won the Champagne Stakes, finished fourth at the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. So not a bad effort by any stretch. And obviously his re-entry into this crop could be a really big deal and add a little bit of depth to a field that otherwise, like we said, seems very top heavy.
Next up, the first of two out of the Cox barn by Justify is Verifying, number 8. I believe we're going to see him in the Risen Star as well. So that's going to be a wild race if that field has everybody we think it's going to have. It's going to really prove a lot out on this top 25.
Yeah.
What do you know on what do we have new on Verifying? Anything?
Nothing really new on Verifying. I will say he's a horse that came back and ran in an allowance race and romped that field easily. I think, a lot of these horses that we've been talking about have been running in stakes races, and we've been kind of seeing them running up against the best within their crop. We've not necessarily seen that from Verifying yet. So I think you and I are both very high on Verifying, but it's also a lot of potential there because I want to see him prove it in the stakes race as a 3-year-old. And then we'll kind of move from there. But he's one who, if he runs that Risen Star, is going to shoot like a rocket ship right up to the top of our list or pretty close to it.
Absolutely, yeah. That's. I think he will too. I mean, just based on what I've seen, and like you said, he's run against much weaker competition than some of these horses have, but impressive nonetheless. Number 7, Giant Mischief, Into Mischief, another Brad Cox horse here. What do we know on Giant Mischief this week?
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's kind of a real question mark, and he might be one, at least for me, next week that really drops a little bit because we've not heard anything out of the Cox barn in terms of where he's pointed to next. Obviously, super impressive second place in that Springboard Mile where he blew the break, kind of like if anybody watched the Swedish Chance Stakes this weekend with Cairo Consort blowing the break at the beginning and then coming like a freight train to win at the end. Giant Mischief kind of did the same thing and just came up short there. But we've not heard anything new in terms of, and now he's on the work tab, so we know he's working, but not heard anything new in terms of plans. So it is one of those things. The longer it goes without plans, the more you have to question, is he all the way back? Is Cox taking a long road with this horse? Is he going to be ready for the Derby, et cetera?
All right. Biggest mover this week was Tap It Trice.
Yeah.
Number 6. I believe we had him. I'm looking now at 17 last week. So he's jumped up the rankings here on our group list here. I actually have him a little higher. I believe I put him at 4, but I was super impressed with him. I thought he was the best horse on Saturday. Again, he was looking at it slightly less competition maybe than the others, but maybe not. This horse is, of course, out of Pletcher's barn by Tappet.
Yeah.
What do we know on Tappet Trice? Were you as impressed as I was?
I was very impressed. I was impressed by his stride coming down the stretch. I mean, he really pulled away from his stablemate Shesterkin late. Now, what I will say is he kind of had the perfect setup. I have no idea what Shesterkin was doing rating in that race. Shesterkin on paper should have been lone speed and should have been up there on the front unbothered. Instead, Shesterkin takes back, rates, and the race was over in the first 2 furlongs because Tappet Trice is sitting there 3 lengths from the lead, and he's usually much more of a deep closer. And it's like, if he's this close, it's over. And the fractions were very slow. I think it was 25 and 50 basically for the opening quarter and half. So, he had it his own way, but I still like the way he finished it off. I mean, to just kind of pull away from everybody the way that he did was very impressive. You want to see this horse at 2 turns. You would imagine the Fountain of Youth is probably the next choice there for Pletcher with this horse. And but super talented and earned a 10-point higher buyer speed figure, earned a 92 buyer speed figure for that effort. So I agree with you. Probably the most impressive horse on the undercard.
Yeah, one of the better horses I think we've seen so far this year. That's why he's up at number 6. Now into the top 5. Not a whole lot of movement on our top 5 from last week. Instant Coffee is up into the top 5. I believe we had him 7 last week.
Yeah.
The Bolt Doro Brad Cox horse targeting the Louisiana Derby next.
Yeah, and I think he is one who, again, this is the same thing as 2 fills. If he could beat Confidence Game by, 8 or 9 lengths, and Confidence Game can beat Rocket Can, then you have to start thinking like Instant Coffee is a horse that has to be taken pretty seriously. And I know people weren't overwhelmed by that Lecomte effort, but he's a grinder. He kind of gets things done. He comes from the back, so he's a little bit like Red Route 1 in that he's probably a little bit pace dependent. But he's a really good horse who doesn't really do anything wrong, and he's beaten good competition, and he's gotten back-to-back graded stakes wins as a 3-year-old. So, which I don't think any other 3-year-olds have at this point. So he's got a very strong resume in that regard of back-to-back graded stakes wins.
I would say when the Lecomte went off and he won it, like you said, not everybody was blown away by that performance. But after the last few stakes races, look back at it, maybe it was a little more impressive than we gave it credit for compared to what we've seen so far. And again, we're early in the season. It just now flipped over to February. So long way to go. But so far, Instant Coffee probably does deserve a top 5 spot here. Number 4 is Cave Rock, who has been MIA a little bit here out of Arrogate. Bob Baffert. What do we know on Cave Rock? What are we doing next?
Yeah, I mean, this is another one who's kind of, I know when we first started this list, he was second, I think, and he's now drifted down to 4th, and I could see him drifting down a little bit more depending on how things go. I think the more and more we see other Baffert horses run, the more we start to question, what Cave Rock is going to be doing next. He's on the work tab, but again, it's a little bit of a question of, where is he headed next? And some of these other Bafferts like Arabian Night, like Newgate, like Faustin, are kind of clearly targeting their next Derby prep. So it's a big question. And I think I'm not going to compare him to Corniche necessarily, but we do have precedent of a Baffert 2-year-old who just doesn't come back at all as a 3-year-old. And, we'll from just last year. So we'll see. I mean, I don't think he's going to go the same route, obviously, as Corniche, but it's starting to get a little concerning. And I think as talented as he is and as good of an effort as he did run in that second place effort at the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, again, some horses increase in stature through sitting out a little bit. Other horses start to decline.
All right. So our top 3, no changes. Victory Formation at number 3.
Mm-hmm.
Out of the Cox barn as well. A lot of Cox, a lot of Baffert. I mean, these guys have what seems like half of the top 25. Yeah. It's probably more like a third of it, but it feels like half. Both have a wild amount of talent. Victory Formation by Taprit. Another horse that's showing this targeting the Risen Star. Yeah. That feels going to be crazy. We're going to learn a lot in that one. But what do we know on Victory Formation? Anything factual on where he's targeting?
Yeah, nothing 100% confirmed, but everything I've seen does suggest that it is going to be the Risen Star. And so it'll be interesting if that field, even if not everybody ends up going to that field, that's still going to be a big field. And I think that is going to be particularly interesting to see how horses handle a big field of quality horses, because the only really other big field of quality horses we've seen is in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. That's it. All these other prep races are 4 horses out in California, 6 horses at the Lecomte, 8 horses at the Holy Bull, maybe 6 or 7 at the Withers this weekend. We're just seeing small fields. And so more than anything, I just want to see how some of these horses navigate a 12, 13 horse field of peers, of really legitimately good horses, not just a maiden race. So that's going to be the big question, not just for Victory Formation, but all these horses going into the Risen Star. But Victory Formation hasn't done anything wrong, undefeated, and is going to put that undefeated line on the record on the line. Yeah,
and the thing is about the Risen Star, I think once 2 or 3 of these top 25 horses commit, I think some of them will decommit or, just decide to go elsewhere for maybe a little easier of a field.
Yeah, it might end up going down to Louisiana.
I can't see these top 25 horses all trying to run against each other for points.
Yeah.
Especially if the ownership group and the connections are looking for an easier bid to the Kentucky Derby. I can't see, any wisdom in going to this race and trying to beat 5 of the other top contenders when you can just go and back into it somewhere else. So
yeah.
Top 2 here, Arabian Nights, probably the best horse we've seen actually run this year by Uncle Mo and Baffert. Rebel Stakes looking like where he's going. And of course, none of these next races are confirmed, but we're doing the best we can with that. Do you think he's the best horse we've seen so far in 23?
Yes, I do. I think he's the best horse we've seen in 2023. I actually love that he's been running not in California. I love that he's just this horse that runs like in the Midwest for Baffert. I just think that's a really interesting route to the Derby potentially. And Yeah, he just looks so good. I mean, it was just so effortless in the Southwest, despite the terrible conditions. And yes, he got him the lead, but he just made it look easy. And this is a horse you would only expect to continue to get better. And again, that front end speed, as we talk about getting potentially bigger fields and more competition, that front end speed is so important. Get out of trouble, right? We talk about horses like Instant Coffee, Red Route One. You're sitting in the back. That's just inviting trouble to happen in terms of a trip, in terms of other horses in front of you. You have that early speed. You don't need to be the lead, but if you can just sit second, third in these races, it makes those trips so much easier for you. And he's got that blazing natural speed.
Yeah, of course, the early speed just keeps you out of trouble, keeps you out of any unlucky situations that can arise because you pretty much control your own destiny. Forte is number one until proven guilty, innocent until proven guilty for the Breeders' Cup champion. That's how we roll. It does look like he's targeting the Fountain of Youth. I don't know if that's been confirmed, but if it is, good luck to everybody else if he runs anything like he did in that juvenile.
And I got to be honest, he also, you look at who else might be running in that Fountain of Youth, and it's almost like there's no excuse for Forte not to win. I mean, a Rocket Can, was a nice horse, but come on. And then, Tappet Trice, maybe you'd say that's a horse that might be ascending and could be a threat. Maybe Blazing Sevens targets this race, we'll see. But, Forte, based upon what I've seen down in that Florida circuit, it should absolutely be the class of that crop down there and should easily win even off the bench. So super impressive horse. I mean, that was just such a good effort at the Breeders' Cup Juvenile and such a great effort the race right before that at the Breeders' Futurity against Loggins.
Absolutely. And listen, we're getting into the thick of it. We've been saying that for a couple of weeks, but it really is now. We've got 3 more Derby points races coming up this weekend in the Withers, the El Camino Real, and the Sam App Davis. We'll probably have to run this top 25 list back again next week because I'm sure there's going to be some shakeups and there's going to be some movements on some of these horses that we're just not sure of. We'll probably just start taking them off the list because, I mean, how long are you going to wait into the season? Because like you said, there's just not that much time left. You've got 6 or 8 weeks left in the true prep season. And, if you're not unless you're somebody that you're super confident can go out and for sure win a 50-point race. Yeah. I mean, where are we at? So.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're right about that. I mean, even though the first weekend in May is, not 3 months away, you're right. The final Derby preps are kind of that beginning to middle of April. Yeah. And so we're kind of 8 weeks away. So if you're not training already, it's hard to imagine you're going to be ready for even one of those big ones. And we're starting to run up against the clock, amazingly so, even though it feels like we just got started.
Yep, absolutely. Hope you guys are enjoying this, trying to make sense of what started out as a few hundred horses trying to have a dream here to make it to the Triple Crown and Kentucky Derby Gate. Starting to narrow it down. We're still not sure on about half of this list, but I think it is starting to come into focus a little bit. So, Matt, thanks for joining.
Absolutely.
Anything else to close this thing out?
No, other than, like I said, big weekend and a lot of unknowns this weekend. We didn't really cover many horses that are running in the Sam F. Davis and the Withers and the El Camino Real. So I do think next week, don't be surprised, particularly between 15 and 25, if there's a lot of shakeup on this list.
Absolutely, man. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Give us a like. Give us a comment. Who do we miss out on? Who do we think or who do we have overrated? Whatever your opinions are, we want to hear them. Thanks for joining, everybody. Peace out.